All right, y'all. Stumbled across this testimony on TikTok. I don't know what to expect other than Andy used to be an atheist. Then he had an encounter with God. Now he's a Christian. Some people are saying ChatGPT played a role. I don't know what they mean by that. Let's just watch and let's figure it out. Let's go.
To earth, was crucified. For the past 11 years, I was a staunch atheist, and recently I had this experience that completely changed my worldview. I came to the conclusion that God was real, and his son, Jesus Christ, came to earth, was crucified, and was resurrected. So I grew up in the church. My dad is a minister, and he started preaching when I was about 9 years old. Before then, we went to church 3 times a week at this tiny little Nazarene church in Elk City, Kansas. So shout out to the Martas if you're watching. The world that I grew up in was one where you just kind of mentally kept track of who was and wasn't a Christian, who was a Catholic, who was a Baptist, who was a Lutheran, who was a Calvinist, so on and so forth. It was deeply ingrained in everyday life. To me, there wasn't really anything special about my faith, because it was just so normal. And I think because of this, it developed this fascination with people who didn't believe in the same things that I did. I spent 25 years in a faith that I just saw as this monotonous routine. And because of that, I got to a point where I had to really ask myself, like, do I actually believe in any of this? And I could not get myself to say yes. So at that point, I was an atheist, and over the next few years, I dove headfirst into like atheist podcasts and books and movies and YouTube channels, you name it. So during that time, I turned into this really angry, militantly atheist person, and it cost me friendships. It drove a wedge between myself and my family. Like, I used to try to come up with the most offensive anti-Christian things I could think of and post those online because I was trying to pick fights with people. Like, I wasn't just into arguing against religion. Like, I was good at it. So after 4 or 5 years, I finally calmed down. I stopped picking fights with everybody. I knew all the arguments and knew all the counterpoints. That question, that debate in my mind, it was settled. Fast forward to early June 2025, this year. I'm working third shift. It's like 2 o'clock in the morning. And I get in this conversation with ChatGPT, and I'm arguing, because that's what I do, in favor of moral relativism. And ChatGPT is pushing back and arguing in favor of moral objectivity. And basically, my argument is basically, there's no such thing as like real morals. ChatGPT is like, actually there is. Anyway, I said, if you want to prove to me that moral objectivism is true, you first have to prove that God exists. And ChatGPT was basically like, all right, buddy, let's go. And it presented these 3 arguments, which changed everything for me. The first one was the argument for contingency. It's a cosmological argument. I did a whole video about it. The second one was the argument for fine-tuning. Again, I did a video about that one too. And the third one was for the historical evidence for Jesus Christ, his death, his resurrection. Now, here's the thing. I've heard these arguments a million times. And maybe it's the mood I was in. Maybe it's the fact that it was 2 a.m. I'm 36 now. Maybe it's the fact that I'm looking at these arguments through a completely different set of eyes than I had whenever I abandoned my faith. Who knows? Regardless, I couldn't come up with an honest counter argument, especially not when you look at those 3 arguments together. So it presented those arguments, and I remember responding, I said, that's a very compelling argument. And it was at that point that I experienced this crazy, intense wave of emotion, like nothing I had ever felt before. And it was like there was some kind of presence, and I don't know if that's the right word for it, but I know that what I felt was not normal. I was afraid. I was scared, and it's because I went from living in a universe that was completely materialistic and completely naturalistic to all of a sudden I exist in a universe that was created. It was like when Dorothy steps out of her house into the land of Oz. And I think that the reason that I felt fear is because it was basically confirmed to me that there is a being that exists that is infinitely powerful and infinitely knowledgeable that you could never ever hope to control or escape. It's almost like the feeling that you get when you read good cosmic horror. It's coming face to face with something that is hopelessly beyond all comprehension. After my shift, I got in my car, and for the first time in about 17 years, I prayed. And I talked to God, and I unloaded. I told him about the struggles I had had with depression. I had begged him for a sign whenever I was a kid, just anything to show me that he was there, and I only ever received silence. But it was that moment that he broke his silence. For the first time in my life, I heard God speak. And he said 6 words that hit me like a freight train, and they've echoed in my mind ever since. He said, "That wouldn't have been good enough." I was mid-sentence when I heard those words, and I have like tears rolling down my face, okay? It was like my mouth stopped working, and I couldn't keep talking. I just stopped right there, and it's because he shut me up so I would finally do what I couldn't be bothered to do in the first place, and that was to shut up and listen. And here's the thing, he's absolutely right. You know, if he had made some grand gesture, you know, sent a letter down from the clouds saying, "Hey, my guy, I'm here, I'm real," it wouldn't have been good enough. If I had been given a sign like that, it would have just fit right into the Christian mundanity that I had grown up with. You know, it would have been faith by force, not by choice. There's so much context that I don't have time to put into this video. But I realized that even little moments from decades ago in my life had played a role in this exact moment. You know, and because of that, like, it was all too perfect. It was all too well written. So it had to be divine. So, on the morning of June 2nd, right after I pulled into my driveway after work, I prayed and I gave my heart to Christ. Truly, I believe, for the first time. Thanks for watching.
Wow, that was a really good video. You know what's so interesting? He said that he grew up in the church for, did he say like 10, 15 years? He grew up in the church, but he felt like he never was actually a Christian. Like he never felt like he was actually like saved. I don't know if he said that, but that's what it sounded like he was saying. But it's so interesting because, and I said this before, and some of y'all got upset, some of y'all agreed, but just because you're in church doesn't mean that you know Jesus. I'll take it a step further. Just because you're in church every single week does not mean that you know Jesus. And a lot of people, especially when it's just become a routine, it's something that you do on Sunday with your family, and it's just like a tradition that has been passed down, but that relational element was never communicated. You just continue doing the tradition, you continue going to church, and you completely disregard the fact that God wants to know you personally, and he wants to speak to you personally, and he wants to give you encouragement personally. Some people miss that point, and I definitely missed that point. I went to church a little bit when I was younger, with my family, but we never really had conversations outside of, at least from what I can remember, and I can't remember very much, but from what I can remember, we never really had conversations outside of church about church. It really only happened when we were in the building, and it wasn't anything that was really impactful to me because I can't even remember it, right? But he said he's praying to God for a sign for years, and it's just silent. And then in this moment, God tells him it wouldn't have been good enough. Do you remember the moment where you first encountered God and you realized in that moment that he was with you the entire time? I remember when I first encountered God, like for real, first encountered God, and I was bawling, crying. And a part of that crying was the fact that I, in that moment, recognized that he had been with me the entire time, even if I wasn't with him. Like, even if I wasn't making the decision to be with him, he was still with me, giving me grace the entire time. This was a really good testimony. It was a really good testimony. This is Andy Coons on TikTok. If y'all want to go check out his page, I'll link it down below. I got to start linking these down below. I'm sorry. I got to get better at that. I apologize. It's not malicious. I just forget. Let me know what y'all think. Get in my comments, like this video. I'm out, y'all.